I now give the floor to His Excellency Rashid Meredov, Deputy Chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkmenistan.
Mr. President, distinguished heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to convey the congratulations on the opening of the 74th session and the wishes for successful work to all participants from His Excellency, the President of Turkmenistan, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov. I would like to congratulate the distinguished President Tijani Mohamed Bande on his election as the President of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly, and I'd like to wish him every success in his important role. I would also like to express gratitude to Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, the President of the 73rd session, for her effective work in that position. Participants, when it established its approach to this session, Turkmenistan based itself on the fact that the current situation regarding the world's realities, as well as the character and political, economic, social trends, do need increasingly closer and coordinated cooperation between states and major international organizations in order to achieve the main aims we are seeking. These include providing peace and security, providing the conditions for sustainable development, and maintaining legal and institutional foundations that lie at the basis of our current world order. How effective this kind of cooperation is, and finding a good balance between national interests and the interests of the whole international community, to a large extent, will determine how successful the solution of other, no less important global problems. These include ecological, energy questions, and the fair distribution of water resources. The balance of interests and high degrees of mutual understanding needs to be the very bedrock in order to tackle issues such as combating poverty, infectious diseases, natural disasters, combating terrorism, the drugs threat, and other challenges. In our opinion, what is key here is establishing and confirming trust and predictability. This needs to be enshrined as the main factor for establishing constructive relations in the international sphere and in terms of adopting balanced, responsible decisions. We are convinced that this process should take as a basis the respect for well-recognized norms of international law and also the UN Charter. In this context, it's important to underscore that the United Nations Organization, despite all the difficulties that it needs to overcome in terms of adapting to the new geopolitical realities, despite this, it is the main and sole guarantor of today's global security architecture. It is the very foundation for our world order and for international law, and it is a symbol of fairness, humanity, and respect for international relations. It is therefore the UN, based on its universal legitimacy, that plays the role of taking an initiative in strengthening trust and in developing multilateral dialogue and in translating the nature and thrust of international discussions into constructive action. Turkmenistan understands its responsibility in building peace, and it has profound respect for the high moral authority of the UN. Therefore, Turkmenistan put forward a resolution about declaring 2021 as the International Year of Peace and Trust. This idea came up for the first time during the President of Turkmenistan's statement at the 73rd session of the General Assembly. And just a few weeks ago, on the 12th of September this year, the GA unanimously and was co-authored by 73 member states of the UN, the General Assembly adopted this resolution. I would like to express our gratitude to all member states of the Community of Nations, in particular those states who co-sponsored the resolution, for their support and the fact they stood in solidarity with our initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, promoting comprehensive peace and promoting security, the support for strategic and regional stability, all these require the international community to have effective instruments that can provide real solutions to these challenges. One of these, in our opinion, is preventive diplomacy. As we've seen from experience, under the aegis of the UN, the levers of preventive diplomacy can bring real results. In particular, the regional UN Centre on Preventive Diplomacy for Central Asia attests to this. This structure currently is an effective link between the United Nations and Central Asian countries in terms of tackling numerous issues. One of the most important is, of course, work to prevent and eradicate different threats that the region encounters. And there needs, therefore, to be a firm basis for peace, security, and sustainable development. During our joint work with the Centre, we develop approaches to current problems such as terrorism, extremism, organised crime, the illicit trade in drugs, ecological problems, environmental problems, and management of transboundary water resources, and also regional stability. We consider that this practice needs to be harnessed in other areas as well, so that there be a whole political, diplomatic and socio-economic arsenal of instruments available to prevent risks and deal with challenges. A key role in establishing non-confrontation and balanced relationships between countries is the principle of neutrality. We believe that the model of neutrality and its underpinning principle of a non-interference in conflict and not being involved in peacekeeping is something that is likely to have a positive impact on the thrust of global policies and would bring it more clarity and predictability. As a state that declared its neutral status on the 12th of December 1995, which was supported by the UN, Turkmenistan has always been and will be a country that will always focus on this. It is logical, therefore, that the General Assembly, on the initiative of Turkmenistan, established a new date in the international political calendar, the International Day of Neutrality, and that was the 12th of December. The international community, in taking this decision, demonstrated its positive approach to neutrality. It deems it as an important factor in today's global politics and understands its long-term strategic aims for the UN. In this regard, we consider that the very basis of neutrality should be paid particular attention in the UN in terms of its practical application. First and foremost, we're talking about using the peacekeeping potential of neutrality and the possibility of conducting mediation missions of the UN with the participation of and on the territories of neutral countries. There are many examples of this, including from our recent past, of such an approach leading to the establishment of agreement and reconciliation. We believe that during this session, it would be a good idea to organise in the UN broad multilateral dialogue on the use of the principle of neutrality in international relations. We would turn to member states of the UN and ask a guidebook on the UN rules on the effective use of the principle of neutrality regarding the settlement of international matters to be developed. We would ask you to support this initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, on the 12th of December, we will celebrate the 25th anniversary of the internationally recognized status of the Turkmenistan as a neutral country. In Ashgabat, therefore, that is next year, in December 2020, there will be the International Conference on Peace, Security and Development. We're prepared to cooperate with the UN Secretariat and with member states of the organization, as well as international structures and all interested parties, to prepare for and hold this forum next year. Mr. President, cooperation with the UN in the area of sustainable development is, for all of us, a priority, and indeed a long-term priority. It is clear that despite efforts that have been made, the implementation of the 2030 agenda is encountering problems. These include financial problems. In our opinion, they can be overcome with the necessary political will and with work being organized properly. There is a need for a clear algorithm and agreement on the earmarking of financial resources for specific programs and projects in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In order to achieve this, Turkmenistan deems it expedient to consider convening a UN conference on financing for development. To this end, we would propose, under the aegis of the UN, establishing an international coordination group to discuss the timeline for holding this forum and where it should be held, as well as its preliminary agenda and other relevant questions. We're convinced that holding such a conference would provide the right impetus to ensuring financial support for the achievement of the SDGs. During this session, Turkmenistan will take additional initiatives to establish international partnership in the area of energy security. To this end, our country, during the 74th session, will present a relevant draft resolutions to the General Assembly, to the General Assembly. We trust in the fact that member states will actively participate in drafting this document and approving its provisions. A strategic area of work of the UN for Turkmenistan is partnership in the area of transport. During this session, our country will take efforts to establish a systemic multilateral dialogue on the issue of transport. We are convinced that international transport cooperation can be successful if it is clearly global in nature, if it focuses on large areas and looks at many different roads and railways that bring together numerous regions and continents. The environment and protection of the environment is something that's traditionally been the focus of Turkmenistan at the UN. During this session, our country's initiative in the in the environmental sphere will be built upon. What I'm talking about is the fact that in August this year in Turkmenistan, we held a Caspian Economic Forum. So the Caspian area is very crucial to us. And that during this, the president of Turkmenistan put forward an initiative to create a Caspian Ecological UN program. Given the importance of preserving the Caspian Sea as a unique natural area, we trust that this initiative will be supported by the UN. During this session, Turkmenistan deems it's important to talk about saving the Aral Sea. We are going to consistently put forward the idea of having a special UN program for countries of the Aral Sea basin. We would ask all interested parties to participate in consultations on the Aral Sea. Our country pays particular attention to upholding international agreements within the UN on climate change. In order to step up work on achieving, or rather upholding, commitments stemming from the SDGs and also the Paris Agreement, the President of Turkmenistan, on the 23rd of September, on the Climate Summit Day that took place in New York, the President of Turkmenistan approved a renewed national strategy of Turkmenistan on climate change. Dear participant, the issue of the preservation and use of water resources is one of the main and most pressing challenges of our times. It would be no exaggeration to say that solving this issue will determine today many different global processes. The prospects of maintaining stability, development, and well-being throughout the world. This includes the political, economic, and social aspects of water. So, water matters need international consensus. There needs to be a pooling of efforts of states where local subsidiary interests need to give way to an understanding of the global nature of this challenge, and focus needs to be on finding unified strategies that are long-term in nature. A key condition here should be the commitment to the principle of the fair and equal access to water resources. It needs to be recognized as a fundamental human right, access to water. It is precisely providing the right to access water, which is something that is mandatory for all states of the world. This is because water is a shared thing for all the people of the planet. Turkmenistan has a position on water matters and is as follows. Firstly, water matters in different regions of the world should be dealt with in line with the appropriate norms of international law and in particular the conventions of the UN. Secondly, water matters must be considered based on the principle of mutual respect, consent, and taking into consideration the interests of all states in basins of rivers and in the areas of water sources and cross-border lakes and rivers. To this end, Turkmenistan is against the building of new hydroelectric facilities on trans-border rivers. This is fraught with socio-economic and humanitarian risks. Thirdly, we are in favour of active and broad participation of international organisations when discussing water matters. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the 74th session of the General Assembly is one that Turkmenistan has considered extremely responsibly. We see our role as participating in the work of the UN to promote comprehensive peace and security, to achieve the SDGs, and to ensure that trust and predictability in international aims be deep-rooted. Understanding the importance of the problems facing us, we believe, nonetheless, that with the right approach and with firm resolve, we can overcome our difficulties. Turkmenistan is convinced in the enormous potential of the UN and in its prestige and its ability to effectively combat difficulties today. We are going to do all we can to strengthen the UN. We will foster its peacekeeping efforts, and we will move forward to focus on development and progress. Thank you very much indeed.
أشكر نائب رئيس مجلس الوزراء.
I thank the Deputy Chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkmenistan.